As they sometimes say on the news bulletins, you may find some of what follows disturbing, although there won't be any flashing lights. But what a lot of what Jesus says is disturbing. It's meant to be, because Jesus deals in stark reality. We're halfway through Luke's account of Jesus' life on earth. Now he's known throughout Galilee and beyond, just as the video showed, as a teacher, a healer, bringing people to life, even from those who are dead. He's also known as a putter-downer of the strictures of official religion and the hypocrisy who load all those heavy burdens onto ordinary people. Just look at the 6 woes on the Pharisees in chapter 11. You neglect justice and the love of God. You go for the best seats in church. You're like unmarked graves. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild? Not. And as a teacher, he didn't put his punches for anyone. This, you lot, is a wicked generation. You ask for miracles. And that's just before the story he's about to tell. But he did tell great stories, even if you had to listen very carefully to understand what he was getting at. And he got a huge reputation. He may not have had the paper qualifications, but no one doubted he was a teacher with a capital T, a rabbi with the authority to sort out the questions that people brought to him, whether it was just who is my neighbor, or the problems of everyday life, like a couple of brothers who are arguing about the inheritance from their dead father. Someone in the crowd, the man who came up to Jesus and made a demand, had a legitimate grievance. His father had died. The law that everybody accepted said inheritance had to be divided equally into X plus 1 shares, where X is the number of brothers available to share it with. I'm sorry, daughters were left out, except when there weren't any brothers. There were 2 sons in this case, so the inheritance was supposed to be divided into 3 shares. 2 went to the oldest brother, according to the law, and the youngest got the 1. And it looks here as if the older brother was hanging on to all 3. And his younger brother was a bit peeved. And he comes to Jesus because he sees Jesus as a rabbi having the authority to make the legal decision which people will accept, which his brother is going to have to take on board, and who doesn't charge legal fees either. So it's a really good idea to come up to Jesus with his grievance, even if he is a bit rude, pushing him with an order to Jesus, tell my brother to share the inheritance. Actually, you could even see it as a compliment. Jesus, I respect you, we respect you so much that we can bring any sort of problem to you because you will sort them out fairly. But Jesus flatly refuses to get involved. He's not going to be distracted from his mission of making known the reality of God's rule through his teaching, through his actions, by becoming a powerful authority figure. He'd already faced that temptation in the wilderness and dealt with it. And also, he can see much more deeply than the man can even see himself. This man's demand is not basically about justice. It's not even about fairness. It's because he wants the money. Why? Of course it's his right. And for him, money and security and rights are all tied up together and matter far more than any of this stuff about the kingdom of God. You can imagine his embarrassment when Jesus flatly refuses him. The bit on the video translates it as friend. In the NIV, it says man which sounds very abrupt, and it was. And then uses this poor guy who must be now flushing through his earlobes to say, this is an example of greed, even though it's greed cloaked with a legal entitlement. And then Jesus comes out with a shocking truth. A man's life is not made up by what he owns, however much stuff he's got. And I can imagine the crowd, as they did on the video, going, huh? And you can imagine our society and the advertising industry and all those who use them for us to get to buy all that stuff going, no, he's just demolished our entire basis of existence. It's not that the farmer was wrong to be rich as such. After all, Jesus had followers who were well off. There were the women who supported his traveling ministry with their gifts. Remember Joseph of Arimathea, who had a high-grade family tomb to give when Jesus died. There was Zacchaeus, whom Jesus hadn't met yet, but who was going to give away half of what he had. There were richer Christians in the early church who were willing to give to the Jerusalem church that was in need. But it's the gifts, gave away, that are the giveaway. Because for those people, these followers of Jesus, their resources was something they knew had ultimately been entrusted to them by God, and they wanted to use them for Jesus and his kingdom. But this farmer was absolutely determined to hold on what he had. Now, it's true he'd worked for it, or at least his workers had. But who'd given that plentiful harvest, the bonus of an extra large crop? He and his workers had put just as much effort in as usual, but who'd given the extra rain? Who'd given the extra sunshine to produce this huge crop? Nothing that he deserved. It was God's undeserved grace working through the providential growing weather. The farmer hadn't earned that. And sure, having gathered this extra large crop and finding it so massive there was no storage space for it, well, it wouldn't have been sensible to leave it outside to rot when the rain finally did come, because that certainly wouldn't have been taking care of God's good gift. But what does he do? No, he did have some alternatives. He could have set up a profit-sharing scheme for his workers, the ones who'd actually done the ploughing, planting, weeding, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, and all by hand. Jerry and I saw that sort of work by hand to produce a harvest when we lived in Pakistan, and it was tough. Or he could have given the surplus away to the needy. Or he could even have sold it at cost price, which would have had the effect of pushing down the local grain prices and benefiting everybody. But no, he makes plans to hoard it. After all, next year's harvest might not be such a good one. And if it is a poor harvest, prices will go up. And then he can sell off small quantities at a time at a much higher price than he'd get now for that surplus. It's money in the barn, laid up for many years. And his words have to be the ultimate me passage. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns. I will build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. I'll invest and save, and I'll say to myself, oh, me, I've got plenty of grain laid up for many years. I'll take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. And now I can really settle down to the life I want. Have you seen that Cunard Cruise ad? I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted to dream. Which I gather is actually totally taken out of context, but it certainly fits in with the ad. The best food, the best wine, the best entertainment. No worries. Relax, retire, live the good life. And if you're watching one of the commercial channels, just tot up sometime how many of those adverts push you towards the eat, drink, and enjoy the good life one. But he's barely poured down his first glass of gorgeous dessert wine and bitten into his first gypsy cream before God calls out to him, "You fool! This very night, your life will be demanded from you. You are going to die. And then, who will get what you've prepared for yourself? Your epitaph is going to read, 'Here lies a fool.'" And Jesus finishes off by saying, that's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God, as the Message puts it. See, a fool in the Bible is not someone lacking in intelligence or has not quite got it all together. It's the person who says in their heart, there is no God, or even if there is, so what? That's the frightening thing about the world around us. It may be prepared to acknowledge that, yeah, there could be a God, and it's actually quite difficult to prove that. In fact, it's virtually impossible to prove there isn't. But so what? Well, we know different, don't we? We nod our heads. We say to ourselves, we say to other people, everybody agrees, you can't take it with you. Because after all, we know that money can't buy you happiness, even if it does help you to be miserable in some degree of comfort. And we talk to each other about stewardship, of making responsible use of the good gifts God has entrusted to us. People of my generation talk about the famous quote from the missionary who died in 1956 trying to take the good news to a tribe of indigenous Indians in the Amazon forest, a guy called Jim Elliot, who said he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to have what he cannot lose. And we say that's wonderful. And yes, of course we've got this attitude, but deep down, do we really, really believe it? Or is there, lurking in the depths, a deep sense of insecurity about the future? That we've got to lay up treasure on earth because we need to repair the car, because someday we're going to retire. All the what-ifs of life. We just need to hold on to that and to lay it up. Sure, we say, God does provide, but that's about the poor and needy. And for those who aren't poor and needy, which I guess is probably most of us, it's a case of, well, really, God helps those who help themselves. And anyway, we want more than just the basics, don't we? Now, it is not necessarily wrong to make thoughtful provision for the future. Joseph of Arimathea gave away his tomb, but he was able to held on to other things, and I think used them for the good. The Christians in Asia and Greece gave away all that they could, putting a bit aside every week in Corinth, for the benefit of Christians who didn't have enough in Judea. It wasn't wrong for them to be earning and to be able to give away what they had. But it's so easy for that to turn into the attitude of, well, I can be rich in things and then I can give a bit away, rather than I'll be rich towards God and then see what he gives me because I won't be the loser. We can so easily find ourselves echoing the response of this successful, wealthy man who was asked what he thought would be an adequate income. And he replied thoughtfully, well, just a couple of £1,000 a year more than I already earn. And I'd be surprised if none of you have actually ever had that sort of thought, because I know I have. And it's so hard to resist the temptation to think like that, because it is all around us. We've seen that pretty well. Every advert you see has the message, buy this and you'll be happy. Invest in that and you'll be secure. And everyone knows it's not really true, but everyone refuses to believe it. And after all, our whole economy depends on our not believing it and our willing collusion with it. And even if we don't go along with the betting ads, I know how much time I've wasted thinking, if only I found that winning Euro Millions ticket in the street and it was last Friday's 65 million cash bonus, just think of the good I'd do with it. And it's a pretty futile exercise. But Jesus made it very clear that putting your trust in riches means laying up treasure on earth where inflation erodes and taxation eats up and scammers and hackers break into your online account and steal. So what is the kingdom alternative? Where is our security really going to come from? In that context, Jesus' next words that Luke puts immediately after this parable come as a complete shock and sound crazy to a world that's terrified of being without. Therefore, I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat, or about your body, or about what you'll wear. Life's more than food, and the body more than clothes. Or for that matter, more than your pension fund, or for the unexpected car repair. Consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap. They've no storeroom or barn. Yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than a flock of birds? Yet now I know there are Christian brothers and sisters for whom that must be a real challenge. I see some of them at the food bank and the community grocery, and I know that food poverty is a real issue in this country, never mind the millions in the rest of the world. We can explore that later, and it's worth thinking through how Jesus' words might affect them. Jesus goes on to say, who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you can't do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Some versions, when Jesus told it, and I'm sure he told it several times, none of you, by worrying, can add a couple of inches to your height. And for those of us who are getting older and smaller, we know that very well indeed. Of course, although Jesus doesn't add to it, we know now that actually worrying about adding an hour to our life is actually more likely to diminish our length of life than add to it. But again, although we say, yeah, we know that, do we really believe it? That breast lump, that niggling pain that just won't go away, that chronic illness that's been getting you down for months, years, do we worry about it? Or do we accept that God knows and cares and supports? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They don't labor or spin. I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. And yes, for some people, they might well say, sure, but Solomon didn't have to provide school uniforms for 3 children who certainly don't worry, but who keep on growing anyway. Do we really trust God to care for us in things like that? Because the ultimate message of the parable of the rich fool is about who we trust. Really, truly trust. The very bottom line of our commitment. I guess most of us will have signed some sort of contract at some point. Our contract, we know, is a legal agreement. I will do this, and you guarantee to do that in return. And we know, as we sign it, that the doing something in return from the person who's made the contract depends on who's backing it up. If the headed paper of the contract paper says, Fred's fly-by-night finance, you probably, I hope, won't sign. But no human structure or institution or society or even family or friends can give you an absolute guarantee of absolute security. Just read the small print of a travel insurance contract and you'll see what I mean. And anyone here remember Northern Rock? But in God, we have the ultimate guarantor. Unlike a company that's in business to make a profit, whatever they say about their valued customers, God is saying he is signing the contract because he is your father and he loves you. And fathers provide for their children. And this father has all the wealth in the world, so much so that he can clothe all the flowers of the field in transient glory. And if the world's riches ever did run short, well, he made the stars also. He is the ultimate and only reliable source of security. So there really is no need to set your heart on what you'll eat or drink, or your car repairs or dental fees. We really do not need to worry about what we do really need. The pagan world around us, the one we as God's children live in, does run around worrying. And it's got every reason to worry, because it's living in a world of insecurity. And that insecurity only seems to be getting worse. It's trying to grab and hold on to the resources, not necessarily out of greed, but out of fear. The resources it thinks it needs. And of course, the world wears itself out in the process. Our Father knows that we need these resources. He is a good Father and won't hold back on what we need. Indeed, he's such a good Father that he often adds in the extras too, because his children, us, are worth it, and he loves us. So don't be afraid of missing out. You know, that's the FOMO thing. It was a bit trendy a year or two back. Fear of missing out, and it's there all around us. Don't be afraid of missing out, Jesus says. The Father wants you to give you the very kingdom itself. So seek his kingdom, and all these things, this stuff, will be given to you as well. The kingdom first, everything else will come second. If that really is true, and we say we're basing our lives on it, just what difference is it actually making to us in our attitudes, our actions? Are we worrying? about how much prices are going to go up, whether the ends will meet, whether the month will exceed the money? Are we worried about filling up bigger barns just in case? Bigger barns filled with self, or bigger barns filled with trusting hearts that know that all the goodness of the Father is theirs?